Welcome again. Barbara Brown Taylor tells this story from her childhood. She writes these words: As a child of the South, I ate grits for years without knowing what they were. I ate cheese grits, buttered grits, grits with pieces of crisp bacon stirred in. Oh, and not instant grits either, but slowly cooking grits, the kind that take 20 minutes to make and end up swimming in their own gravy. Finally, when I was about 12, I asked a friend of mine if he knew what they were. The truth, he said, grinning wickedly. You really want the truth? He told me that grits were small bugs that lived in colonies on the surface of freshwater lakes like algae. And at the end of every summer, they were harvested and shelled and dried in the sun so that they could not even tell they had ever had legs on them. He concluded as my stomach drew itself into a ball. So, whenever I hear about manna, I think of grits. They're both fine, flaky things that are absolutely no good as leftovers. Of course, we recognize that part about the leftovers being particularly true. Exodus says that they couldn't gather more than a day's worth of manna, or it would spoil, except on the eve of the Sabbath when they could collect enough for 2 days. For an amazing 40 years, then, the people learned to live one day at a time, which is a good thing, depending on God's provision on a daily basis, not even knowing exactly what it was they were eating. As a matter of fact, the word manna is translated as, "What is it?" They saw it and they asked, "What is it?" We may not even recognize from Barbara's story that the other part of the parallel to the manna, the other part of the parallel to the manna story also, about grits being bugs, basically. Manna probably was too, sort of. The Bedouin who live on the Sinai Peninsula still gather something which they bake into bread, which they even call it manna. The flakes themselves come from plant lice that feed on the local tamarisk trees. Because the sap is poor in nitrogen, the bugs have to eat a lot of it in order to live. And what they then excrete is a yellowish white flake or a ball of juice that the tree um, didn't have the nutrition, but in its concentrated form is rich in carbohydrates and sugar. Basically, this bug poop, very nutritious, but decays very quickly and attracts ants. So a daily portion is the most that anyone gathers. Does that sound a bit familiar? Now, before you think it, I want to say this, that some people will dismiss this explanation of the manna as taking away from the miracle. I don't see it that way at all. Does something have to come out of nowhere in order to be classified as miraculous? Everything around us is miraculous, isn't it? God hears the complaining of hungry people and feeds them with bug poop, something that may never have otherwise occurred to them to eat, and it comes from God. That's what makes it a miracle. There's also an explanation for a large number of quail that appeared in the evening of that day that they complained. A certain species of quail migrates from Europe to Africa across the Mediterranean Sea in large groups. And at the end of the migration, they fall exhausted in great hordes. So this could explain how the Israelites may have been literally pelted with quail one evening. Another miracle of God. Remember, it comes from God. If it comes from God, it's a miracle. What I wonder is, how often have these small miracles occurred right before our eyes and our ears and our noses, and we have never noticed? How many times has God provided food for the hungry? And we never realize that it is a miracle. Everything that we put into our mouths and pass to our bellies is a miracle provided by God. The sad thing is, not only do we not recognize the miracles, but we take them for granted and even abuse them on a regular basis. And we try to hoard and save up the bits of miracle, processing and stocking them in our cupboards to the point that the nutritional value of them becomes spoiled and they're worthless to us nutritionally. Now that sounds a bit familiar too, doesn't it? The miracle is that God is always sending us something to eat. The simple things of our lives, such as bread, some love, some breath, some wine, so many of the absolutely necessary things that are here today and gone tomorrow. The second half of the miracle is that with the distraction of our hungers, that we have recognized these small miracles at all. Often we want our bread from heaven to just sort of drop straight out of the sky and perfectly crusted butter-topped loaves, and that is why we hunger a lot. We're hungry and thirsty for so much more than food and drink. When we don't think that God has heard our prayers and we haven't gotten what we have been praying for, we think that God has somehow abandoned or ignored us, or even that God is punishing us for some perceived wrongdoing. This makes us want to start looking about us at other people and noticing that they've gotten what they need, and then some extras. And we compare ourselves to them, and we complain to God about the disparity between how hard we have worked and how little we have compared to others who don't work nearly so hard. Like the workers in Jesus' parable, remember, we complain without realizing that, hey, your daily need has been provided for. Why do you need more? We're missing the things that God is doing for us on a daily basis because we seem so small. They seem so small and ordinary, like bug poop, or maybe just too transitory, like enough money to provide for now, not later. Or like manna, which dissipates with the heat of the day and spoils too soon to keep account of. If, on the other hand, we're willing to begin looking at everything around us, everything that we really need is coming from God, our lives will be different. A can of beans will be manna, grits will be manna, bug poop will be manna. There could be nothing too transitory or too ordinary in our lives to remind us that it comes from God. And when we're grateful for what God has provided to us, we see more and more as miracle from God. And then our complaints waver and subside more and more as well. During the past few weeks with the many crises that are around us, especially the hurricanes and I think a few earthquakes too, well, my husband and I have been looking at things that we take for granted and realizing that when we make a simple meal, even when it's not much, there's someone in another place that doesn't have that right now. And we're grateful to have what we have. When we flip the switch to turn on lights or use the blender to make a shake, we realize that people in flooded, hurricane-destroyed areas still have no electrical power. And we are grateful that we do. When we get a nice cold glass of filtered water, we realize that there are people in those same areas who get none. Desperate enough to drink contaminated water because they're not close enough to a place where fresh water supplies are available. And it makes us want to do all we can to make that situation better and be grateful no matter where our daily bread comes from. When we're full of gratitude and awe at what God gives us each and every day, we can go to bed at night And when we wake up hungry, we find a fine, crusty substance on the ground and say, what is it? And when you hear someone say that it is the bread of God that comes from heaven, that God has given you to eat, you will believe it. And you will say, thanks be to God, for God has provided. God is made known to us day by day in the simple ways that provide for our lives in food, in love, in relationships, good deeds, the very air that we breathe, health, energy. The list continues. These are needed things that are here and gone again. And on top of that, there are things that are unnecessary blessings. And God provides us with some of those things too. We pray for our daily bread, and it's provided by the same God who provided the daily manna in the wilderness, one who loves us still. Look around and see. Count your blessings. Share with your brothers and sisters, and don't hoard. Give and receive God's blessings. Trust in God's provision. Share generously so that all may have necessities, for God is generous too. We have enough, and it will continue to be enough for us all, for it is all provided by the one who loves us.